Morning, everyone.
Hi there.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So we're not going to have any slides in this session, unfortunately. Just kidding. My name is Guy Hilton. I'm the general manager of Startup Nation Central. I think you heard slightly about us from Wendy's presentation about an hour ago. And with me today is Barak Regev. Could you please just introduce yourself, Barak?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I'm Barak. I'm the general manager of Google in Israel. And I'm privileged to be here and hopefully entertain you guys with some indulging facts about Israel and why it's a great place to be and why are we here. Me and Guy go a bit back in history. I stumbled across this guy back in the days when we both worked in Microsoft. So full disclosure, we have some mutual background, but we haven't seen each other for a good few years. So this is a good opportunity also to reflect and catch up on stage in front of you guys. Hopefully we won't go too far.
Yeah.
Promise you.
No horror stories from
Yeah.
Microsoft days. Yeah.
How many kids do you have? I'm
Nah,
kidding.
I'm just kidding. All right, so let me tee it up
Yeah.
and start with an easy question. We talked about the ecosystem. Alan just gave us an amazing presentation about also the statistics and the ins and outs of it.
Definitely.
But when you, from your perspective, when you look at the ecosystem, what do you think would be, in your mind, the strengths of the ecosystem? How does that differentiate from other hubs that you've been at and in your journeys?
Sure. I spent a good few years outside of Israel. I just came back here a year ago. I was running and setting up the Google Cloud business in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I was based out of London, so I do have a good perspective on other hubs like London, Berlin, mostly in Europe. And I think that what makes Israel so unique, and Alan touched it, is our size, first and foremost. It's one of our biggest advantages and disadvantages. But I think the three other things, and Alan touched greatly on the access to capital. Berlin for a long time was a great place for young entrepreneurs, and we could see that, but yet capital was not coming into the city in the pace that it was coming into Israel, and you could see how if you were an entrepreneur in Berlin, you would eventually migrate yourself to London to be closer to the capital. So one, it's that access to capital, which is not only Israeli-backed funds, but as well as multinational venture capitals. The other two are quite unique. It's the culture and the human capital. And I think these are very unique. And just by show of hands, how many are first time in Israel? Okay, good. So hopefully I can explain a bit more what it means, human capital and culture. On the human capital front, math, Alan touched it, as a proud father of two amazing daughters, which one of my eldest is one of those that are helping crack those statistics of diversity and women going for the mathematics and computer science subjects. But we are very driven by academics because we don't have any natural resources, guys. 2/3 of this country is desert. You're in Tel Aviv. You're literally in the center of the country where everything's happening. This is the country. But yet 2/3 of the land is completely Sahara Desert. Beautiful. I'm going there on the weekend, by the way. It's a great place to reflect and open up your mind. And yet this neighborhood has caused us to realize that while you don't have natural resources, the only resources you have is human capital. And for a fact, if you think about it, Israel is an ordinary country. When you look at the GDP, we're mid-rank. When you look at the GDP per capita, mid-rank. But when it comes to innovation, you start seeing where Israel shines. We're the number 2 rated country in the world that has R&D as part of the expenditure of the total GDP. Second in the world. We are obviously generating the most amount of venture capital outside of Silicon Valley, and the amount of Nobel Prize winners coming out from our institutions is quite remarkable given the fact that we're only 8.8 million people. That's it. We're a tiny country, but that human capital has become the essence of our heritage. The other thing is the culture. And the culture is quite interesting. The military has a remarkable point for this melting pot. I would not recommend every country to go and establish a military process in order to create a melting pot. It's a necessity of our way of living in the neighborhood we chose to live, but it does create something quite unique. And I'm sure many of you heard about the unit A200, which is our elite intelligence cyber unit in the intelligence that helps create a lot of that culture or the melting pot. But then there's three other things I want to call out. It's our willingness to take risks. As a person who grew up in between the States and Israel, born in the States, I can tell you that the appetite for risk for an average Israeli is by X amount tenfolds higher than any other person you would see. And again, I think that's the culture we live in. The other thing, and my boss says it quite nicely, our mothers, our brilliant Jewish mothers, have equipped us with something quite unique. Never be satisfied. And with that dissatisfaction and that willingness to drive even more, we go the distance. And last but not least, again, I think that it's that willingness for us between the risks, the unsatisfaction, and the military comes that willingness to explore. An average Israeli will mature at the age of 21 after he finished his compulsory military service. He will not go immediately to school. He will take a year off to rediscover himself. And he enters life at 22. Think about it. He's behind 4 years of a guy in the US or anybody graduated from high school, went and got his BA. By the time he's 22, he's already thinking about his first job. An average Israeli is thinking either about starting his own startup, should I go to school, do I want to continue exploring the world, or do I just want to go invent something? And that's why you're seeing the phenomena of the amount of startups being generated in an accelerated fashion. Because the population's growing and more people are interested in that. And I think that's what makes us unique. And last but not least, in an hour you can literally, from my office in Tel Aviv, I can literally see the market. I see the market. It's an hour north, an hour south, and that's it. You've mapped 95% of the market. How easy is that, right, compared to the US?
So I want to take you back to the culture thing.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting point because, for example, when we host other multinationals,
Yeah.
Gucci, Airbus, Merck, whatever, one of the key things we keep on hearing is the Israeli culture, which on one end seems to be something they really want to explore and align with and attach themselves to. On the other end, there is always the question, so how do we actually interact with that culture? So from your experience, what would you say needs to be considered when you're a multinational trying now to work with the Israeli ecosystem and its culture?
Well, first, know how to count till 10 in your head. Don't react. So Israelis, okay, so that's a great question. And as a guy who's been working in a very multinational company, if I might say, and leading a big operation in London, you can see the gaps quite often. So one, we're very direct. If we think an idea is dumb, you'll hear about it. We won't say, oh, that's an interesting idea. That doesn't exist. That word, which is a brilliant word in English, interesting, which everybody knows what it means, but it's a very nice, subtle word, doesn't exist in Hebrew. It literally doesn't exist. You would hear somebody tell you, oh my God, that's so stupid. And sometimes it's good to have that in your face type of attitude. I talked about the dissatisfaction, so it's like the other thing is never expect to get too many praises during the process. So even when you do a good job, hey, not bad. You won't hear the word, great job, guys. Not bad. Not bad is a great compliment. And again, a lot of that cultural, seriously, not bad, if you think about it, is a very positive way of thinking about, it's thinking about the alternative. It could be bad. So it's not bad, it's good.
It's not too bad.
It's not too bad. The other one, and I think that's where, in a minute I'll tell you where it's really bad, I think, for how to interact with Israelis on that front. But the other thing is, the average Israeli will jump from one idea to the other quite fast. It's quite fast. Their appetite to explore more is quite, and that need, and in other places you see the ability to go deeper for a longer, or the willingness to run longer term. So that's one thing to take into consideration. But over time, guys, the world is flat. Internet is bridging these gaps, and also Israelis are learning. Alan talked about that. He's right, the vast majority of entrepreneurs here are B2B, but if you look at the last few years, the B2C scene has started to pick up here. One of the hottest companies in the market now is a company called Lemonade, which I don't know how many of you heard. It's a company out of a street in Tel Aviv disrupting the entire US insurance home market. They're not about B2B, they're all about B2C. And when you think about companies like Fiverr, Marketplace, so Israelis are starting culturally wise to look outside and realize that they can learn quite a bit around the world of how you do proper B2C building, how you do proper planning. And the one thing I am most proud about is the amount of companies potentially that we can go IPO and not necessarily exit. It also shows you a shift in the cultural mindset of an Israeli entrepreneur. Usually an Israeli entrepreneur, usually as in the next failing entrepreneur, big failure, usually the questions you would hear or the cafe talks 10 years ago would be, so how fast do you think we can sell it? How much do you think we can get for it? Do you think it's valid for an exit strategy? Nowadays, you hear companies talking the distance, and I love it. And that's a cultural shift happening in Israel because of that melting pot between Israel and other entrepreneurs outside, bringing CEOs from the US, moving from Israel to the US to be closer to the market. The Israeli is shifting a bit in terms of understanding that this is a marathon. This is not a sprint.
So essentially we're saying we're slightly shifting from startup nation to scale-up nation, in your words.
You know what? I think that we just celebrated 70 years. I think we're now starting to redefine what does Israel 2.2 look like. I think it's a very, well, yeah, very different.
So we're still in beta, though.
Yeah, but it's still very much startup nation, and it will remain, I believe, startup nation for a good few years before we think about scale-up nation. But that's a good term, by the way.
Thank you. Let's talk a bit about Google.
Sure.
So what was, can you tell us the story about how did Google go about setting its first offices in Israel? What was the decision criteria?
Yeah.
How did that come to be?
So it didn't come through an acquisition. Many companies do, and Alan was right by saying that. Many companies enter the market through some level of acquisition. It's quite remarkable, by the way. There's 352 multinational companies nowadays in Israel. How do I know that number? I'm part of that society. And 352 is remarkable because if you would look 10 years ago, it would be probably a fraction of that number. The biggest one is Intel, which has its entire fab operations rotating between the US and Israel. And us in Israel now, we have 900 employees. It's one of the biggest centers of Google in terms of research and development outside of Mountain View. So we have here a core search team as well that does a lot of funky stuff. And to be a proud Israeli and a proud employee of Google, if any of you are enjoying type as you search or recommendation, all invented here in Israel and managed here in Israel. So it's part of that innovation that we bring back to the market. Why did Google invest in Israel is probably, there's three sections to that answer. It happened back in 2004. Google was listing itself as a public traded company, was starting to scale quite exponentially, and it realized that it needs to become a true multinational company. So that's number one. It's just the desire of the company to start spreading outside the US. And then that hit number two, that when they started looking around the globe, where do we want to go? Being Google and very much connected to the world of academics, like Google and Stanford, they looked for an anchor institute around the world, and they saw the Technion, which is our own Israeli MIT in Haifa, as a great place to build an operation. So our first office actually in Israel is in Haifa, which is still in place. It's a research center, and it taps a lot to the talent of the Technion. And the third thing was, I think, that the results, they started seeing how good the operation here was, and eventually we started investing. Add the fact that the US or the Silicon Valley is in a bit of a distress situation in terms of cost, in terms of access to talent, the competition. Other places like Israel have been enjoying a lot of extra investment. So we have been growing this operation quite substantially. And we also are now managing our entire business operation for the region out of here. So we're pretty proud of what we've managed to accomplish in Israel.
And you've built, as you said, a fairly large operation here and also in Tel Aviv. And part of it is also, and that leads me probably to my next question, is you work a lot with the ecosystem. So you're not siloed out there as a research center.
No.
So what are the best practices you use to interact with startups? If you can share maybe a success rate, but I'm also going to challenge you a bit. I want to ask you to also share about something that didn't work.
Oh, that's easy. But I'll start with that. So being Israelis with our culture. Even though we got the mandate to do this amount of things in Israel, obviously we had to break the barriers and we had to start experimenting here as being proud Israelis. So one of the things that we've done here, we created Google Campus. Google Campus is, in a way, was invented and branded here in Israel and now is apparent in 8 other cities across the globe. And I think that's part of our magic of how to communicate with the community. Google Campus, in a way, in layman's term, is an accelerator, non-accelerator. What do I mean? So we are now going to be launching a new version of Campus, but it's basically a meeting place where you get mentoring from Google engineers and Google business people. You get a place for a venue for events. You get a place for sharing of ideas. We didn't invest. It wasn't a stepping stone for Google Venture. It wasn't in any way for us to assess the startup. It was really about building the community and creating a dialogue between entrepreneurs and a mixer party between entrepreneurs and basically venture capital angel investors. And to be honest, guys, there's no better time to be an entrepreneur nowadays. If you think about it, if I have an idea and I want to start doing it, I probably don't need to really raise any money. You get credits and love from any cloud provider, be it Google, Amazon, Microsoft. Again, as part of our campus program, we originated the concept of cloud credits here in Israel and started feeding the startup community. But then if you think about the shared working spaces, I'm not talking about the WeWorks, the free ones, the accelerators that offer you a place to work. So I don't need to spend money on tech. I don't need to spend money on an office space. On what do I need to spend money? I'm probably going to feed you as well. So you're going to get food from me. So eventually you see that we've helped a lot, I think, the community kickstart, and in a way I'm so proud to see the number Alan showed, about 1,600, if I'm not mistaken, new companies, because I think that we helped accelerate a lot of that willingness for entrepreneurs to understand you don't have to start immediately by raising $1 million or $500,000. You can, with a good idea and good mentoring, you can kickstart. So we do open houses. I interact with most venture capitals because we like to do two things with your portfolio companies, and we do it proactively. One, we want to make sure that they're doing what's right if they're using our technology, so we will provide free of service, like consulting. Let us look under the hood and tell you what we think for you, so we can help them optimize, maximize their investment in technology. The other place that we do is we give you pure service about monetization and marketing strategy. I'm a company. I want to retransform the insurance market in the US, and I want to strategize. How do I go about? Which state do I start? How do I segment? What's the demographics? We will provide you that from a full service solution for that without taking any stake or just giving you the right advice, because again, it's a win-win, guys. I won't be misleading you. If they adapt our strategy, if they adapt our technology, if they believe and they succeed, obviously I'm going to succeed as well because they'll become part of my ecosystem and partner. Now, it doesn't always work. You know, it's hard. It's hard. We are, like, in a way, I consider myself also running a venture capital arm, even though we don't actually invest, because I manage a business operation here, and I'm supposed to interact with companies that leverage Google's technology in order to create monetization schemes, in order to reach users across the globe. And yet, choosing who do I pick, because my workforce is limited. I have scarce resources like anybody, even though I'm Google. So we fail quite often. That's what I mean. So we pick the wrong horses sometimes. We invest our time and resources in the wrong companies. And on a personal note, I'm proud to say that one of the reality why I'm not an entrepreneur is that I was probably an entrepreneur too early in my days. In 1999, I joined a company just before the bubble burst that was about to transform the world of B2B. And at that time, just to compare, the 20 years later, we raised finally $2 million. We were so proud of that. But the following day, 1.3 million went to buy Sun hardware and Oracle licenses. It's crazy. It's crazy, and that was my biggest failure that really helped me understand. Well, that didn't fail. It wasn't the 1.2 million we spent, but eventually with 800,000 left and the bubble about to burst, we didn't have any way to succeed. 6 months later, we realized that. And so that's the continue. So it just changed a bit the dynamics in terms of access to capital and how you spend it wisely. And that's where we have to be cognizant about how we interact with the market and make sure we provide them, one, the right advice and the right connections, because that's how we see ourselves as Google. We're the lighthouse of this market, and we can be a good shepherd and a good steward to direct them in the right way.
Okay, so we're almost at the top of the time we're allocated. I want to give you a chance to share your sort of final thoughts on the Israeli ecosystem, and what would you suggest, the one tip you would give this audience as we walk off the stage?
Well, the one tip I have to say, because all these hands that said your first time, please tell me you've allocated time to tour Israel as well and not only do business. That's the one tip. It's a beautiful country and there's no better time of the year to visit. Humidity is still low and it's not too warm.
It's actually winter.
Yeah, this is winter. Look at me. I'm wearing my top.
So,
but Israel 2.2, as I say it, Israel, startup nation, 70 years old. It's only the beginning. It's crazy to think about it, but it is only the beginning. When you look at the trends of technology happening, machine learning, artificial intelligence, the pace of the adoption now that's happening, it's only continue to accelerate. Mobile, we always think that mobile has reached maturity. Let me tell you something. Forget about it. It's only the beginning when you think about augmented reality, virtual reality. You think about that the global population is still not all connected to the internet. We've only this year, 2018, is a pivotal year for us as human beings because it's the first year that it's the majority of the world is going to be connected. But you still have emerging markets, Africa, 1 billion people not even enjoying what you and I are enjoying on a daily basis. So that's where I think you're going to start seeing more and more Israeli of the ecosystem. You're starting to see more and more entrepreneurship around developing and around emerging markets and thinking about how you crack the further markets, Africa, Asia. US is still the golden boy, the prize is, but it's a hard market to penetrate. Access to, we still have great talent. The one thing that I completely relate to Alan is our investment. We have to step up, and I'm doing that proactively, our investment outside of Tel Aviv country. We don't have enough representation from the periphery, either the geography periphery or the diversity. Proud father of 2 amazing girls. There's no reason why we will not have the same amount of women CEOs, women GMs, and women entrepreneurs. And that's the one thing that I would tell you that you guys need to help us, because that's where the culture has to shift also in the Israeli mindset. And that's how I would end it.
All right, so Barak, thanks a lot.
Thanks
for taking the time.
Cool.
And just my closing word is, we're really excited to be here and share these types of insights and content with you and be your content partner throughout the week of Startup Nation. And all of the Startup Nation guys here on the room will be here all week, accompanying us through whatever activity we do, and with the intent of actually exposing you and helping you explore as much as we can of this amazing ecosystem. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Listen, baby.